Thank you for listening to and watching the Chris and Retro podcast. This is a two-part series with Ed Wallace. Part 1 starts now.
Welcome to the Chris and Retro podcast. Today I have a special guest. He is a managing director of Achieve Next sales team training, 30 years of business relationship training. He's worked with over 300 leaders. He's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and sales training facilitator. He's written several books: Fair to Friends, Creating Relationship Capital, Business Relationships at Last, which was a #1 bestseller, and then The Relationship Engine, which also was a #1 bestseller. He's a Villanova basketball fan. We have a shared dream of visiting Scotland and family. My special guest, welcome Ed Wallace.
Chris, great to be with you here on Chris and Retro.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We met through a mutual colleague, and it's been a pleasure. We've known each other for a few short days, and I feel like I've known you for a life. So this has been a lot.
That's
very
right.
enjoyable to
right.
meet you. But 45 years old, you did a complete pivot in your life, and why is that? What happened?
Just jump right into it, Chris, right? So I was a very successful VP of sales for a technology company. I live in the Philadelphia area. Mm-hmm. And Chris, if anybody had their future out in front of them, it was me. I could have stayed here forever. I was at this company forever. I was their 9th employee. I think we had over 100 at that point. Had an evergreen contract, kind of like a college basketball coach. It just rolled over every year.
Right.
And on August 26, 2005, we just had an anniversary of that date. I got a call at my office, and it was my wife, Laurie. And she said, I need you to get to our friend's house in the town we lived in, which was about 20 minutes from my office. She said, our son, Grant, our 8-year-old son, Grant, had fallen, and he was upset, and she was out shopping further away. And she said, just get there, make sure he's okay. Fine. Mm-hmm. Halfway there, she rings my cell phone. And she said, my wife was an ER nurse at the time, and not a lot upset her. She said, they're going to medevac Grant to Children's Hospital. You need to get to the community college, which is where the helipad is. Our kid's not getting on a helicopter without one of us. So you can imagine how heavy my foot got at that point.
Absolutely.
I get to the community college. It's all speed bumps. I've never been back there before. My kids weren't college age yet. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, I see a helicopter with the wheels, the rotor slightly turning. I see an ambulance. I see a little blonde kid in a gurney with the blocks on his forehead, Chris, just like they take the football players off the field. Right. So this is really a shock to the system at this point. Nothing can prepare you for this. Mm-hmm. So by the time I get to Grant and navigating through the people asking you to sign things and all these faces, from the town who happen to be the EMT, who happen to be the firemen, they all show up, the police. These are all people you would see, but now you're actually seeing them in this mode. I remembered Grant's feet were ticklish. And so they had his sneakers off. And I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? And I tickled his feet and his legs vibrated. So I'm thinking, okay, check that rational box that maybe he's not paralyzed.
Right.
Laurie gets there at that moment. The pilot comes over in the jumpsuit. They're off. They're going to get to Children's Hospital in 4 minutes. Brett, our older son, who's on the autism spectrum, is the voice of reason on the ride down to the hospital. We get to the hospital. We navigate through the parking garage and how to get down to the main floor of this amazing children's hospital. The moment we step off the escalator, a woman approaches us with a lanyard on, and she said, "Are you the Wallace family by any chance?" And I said, yes. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, why did they send someone to find us?
Right.
She introduced herself, and she said, I just want you to know, Grant is stable. I'm going to take you to where we take our helicopter kids. And as awkward as that sounds, it just comforted me because, okay, they do this all day long. By the way, Grant's fine today. He works here in the business with me now. But I recovered and pivoted at that moment because if that can happen to an 8-year-old, at 45, when am I going to actually start doing what I want to do?
Right.
So the concept of worthy intent popped into my mind at that point. And that's always putting the other person first, which we all know, the golden rule. We call it a lot of different things. But it's not about having good intentions, Chris. It's about, are we seeing behavior from other people that validates our good intentions? That's when you know whether your worthy intentions are being displayed or not. And that's a foundational principle in all of my books. It's foundational to the way I try to live my life. Approach everybody with good intentions, assume they have good intentions as well. And if the hospital were to reflect back on what the Wallaces did to display worthy intent, our children were switched to that health system. My wife recommended CHOP Doctor. It's called CHOP. That's the acronym for Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She recommended doctors we donate. So it's not, worthy intentions are greens fees. It's, are you seeing behavior that validates those?
So in our practice,
me to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly understand that story is pretty remarkable. I will have to note that you did the ultimate and protective parent afterwards. Now he even has to work for you as an adult.
He has to endure that every day.
You won't even let him out of your sight for his job.
Right.
As a practical matter, though, when you talk about worthy intent, if I understand correctly, you're saying that for us to validate that people are getting what our intentions are, we look at their responses. Is that a fair statement? So in a practical everyday life, there's a lot of people in all kinds of spaces. There are a lot of people working for nonprofits and things like that. And I think a lot of burnout comes from not reading the room well, so to speak. So I guess, what would be some of the indicators to validate that my intentions are being heard?
Well, again, worthy intent, Chris, you nailed it, is in the response we get. A monk does not know that their good intentions are being acknowledged. They don't really know that their good intentions are making a difference, but we can observe behavior. So from a business standpoint, a meeting got extended with a high-level person we're working with. Confidences are shared with us. Strategies are shared with us. If you think about our personal relationships, someone takes you into their confidence about their career, something they're struggling with, their marriage. So we want to observe those behaviors, and when we see those trusting, authentic behaviors coming back to us, that's when people get your good intentions.
Gotcha. I can see that in personal relationships as well. You see people shut down. That's a number indicator that they're not getting or they are getting exactly what you're sending, and it's not all that worthy intent.
Exactly.
So your background, this is a very nuanced business. I mean, when you think about what you do for a living, most people rely on process. That they've gone with heritage programs and they've just become experts in those programs that have been around forever. But what brought you to a place? Because it's from my short interaction with you and people that we know that say the same thing about you. You're really authentic, and what you're saying on here is who you actually are. But what got you here? What brought you to this path? What's your background?
Well, I grew up in a really small town. Believe it or not, the town is named Frackville.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris, you go to Beyond, and it's behind Beyond. That's where this town is, and it was an old coal town in northeastern Pennsylvania, and grew up with a lot of traditional values. People didn't lock their doors. You've heard these stories before. You went out on a Saturday, and some mom took care of your lunch, and your parents never worried about you. We rode our bikes everywhere. Also grew up with, okay, you work hard, you get a job, and you enjoy life when you retire. And and when I was 30, my father, who had that philosophy, and all he wanted to do was go fishing. And I said, well, Dad, go fishing on your day off or go fishing on Sundays. And he said, no, I'm going to wait till I retire. He retired, got a fishing license from Kmart, passed away 6 months later.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you hear about those stories all the time, too. That's not, shockingly, and not uncommon. We hear about people that wait so long and then retirement's there, and for whatever reason, they pass or have something come up that takes their time, either from a health concern or something else that goes on. So,
exactly.
I mean, it's sad, but unfortunately all too true. And, from the world that I've spent a lot of time in, the mental health world, there's other ways to die, just either through, losing purpose, sense of direction in a lot of ways. I've seen a lot of people retire and not really know what their life is about anymore and lose meaning. So, this background that you were, born in. I mean, I know you've talked about some of the relationship issues with, with your father and some of his history as well. I guess if you could talk to me a little bit about how that's moved over for you. What's fatherhood like for you now?
Well, I have the young man who was in the car with me during the helicopter story. He's 32 now, and his name is Brett. And Brett did not go to college. He works at the local movie theater. Everybody knows him. In fact, M. Night Shyamalan knows him. M. Night Shyamalan lives in our town, and he knows Brett. And
That's
Brett
funny.
calls him Midnight Shyamalan. So, he is
Nice.
he is the most authentic and happy person that we know. Maybe happy is not the best, content. And, I talked, when we talked earlier, Chris, we talked about The Road Less Traveled. And great book. And it starts off with life is difficult. The first sentence in the book is life is difficult. Wow, I don't know if I want to read this book, right? But it's a great book about, religion and spirituality and love and getting to know who you really are. And Brett's on a different road. He's on a road that his brother isn't on. His brother is on he's a high charger, high academic, college baseball All-American, great salesman here for me, thank goodness. He's on a different road. And Laurie, she's on a different road. I need 50,000 friends. Laurie needs 5. And she holds those friends dearly. And I aggregate friends. It's friends. I met you. It's oxygen to know someone like you for me.
Oh.
So that's a little bit about my family.
Nice. Yeah. My daughter is one that she needs 3 friends. I joke with her. She usually starts about 6 in a new environment, and it never fails. It's down to 3 before it's all said and done. I don't know if it's a tolerance or what it is. But obviously relationships has become important to you in your life. It's become what you've made your career out of. Why are you an expert in this space? What makes somebody to be an expert in this? I mean, it seems like that's something we all strive for.
Well, thank you for the flattery. Expert, I like that. Chris, when I was in my sales career, the one thing I was good at was relationships. I don't know why. I just was attracted to learning. I was curious about people. I was curious about their story. So I embraced that opportunity to just get to know people. And so then when I had the pivot point with Grant, what was I going to do? Well, I figured I need to write a few books to get some credibility. But as you know, I'm a CPA. And I don't want to joke about recovery because, you and I have talked about that from my family's perspective and yours as well. But I'm a CPA in recovery. So sales was my road less traveled for that kind of occupation. And what was I good at relationships, and what was no one teaching in the sales or the business world? Relationships. It was called the dark art. So I started putting together stories from all my travels over the years. You heard about my friend Max, the taxi driver, and how incredibly impactful he was on my life. He kind of replaced my father after my father passed away. And I just started documenting things, knowing someday I might actually write a book. And then, we have the helicopter ride. It's time to write the book. We developed a process for relationships. And it's nothing, Chris, when you first meet someone, do you have to have you have to find something in common with them?
When I first meet them, I would say it's uncomfortable when I don't. And we usually have to at least have a common place that we start talking. There's a lot of people I have to talk to in a day that I don't really have an awful lot in common, but we at least have to find some place where we share direction. Exactly.
And a relationship is nothing more than 2 people coming together around something in common. It could be their struggles. It could be their business goals. It could be their families. So I started thinking about, okay, we go through a process to build relationships, but if I write it down, it might offend people. It might make people think, wait a minute, this is a manipulation. But if you think about it, we create a 5-step process called the relationship ladder. And we have to find something in common. We call it establishing common ground. Once we do that, we start doing things together. Then we get to trust each other. Because until you and I are doing things together, Chris, we might feel we're trustworthy people, but we can't really display that. So the second rung of this 5-step ladder is displaying trust. The third rung is using time effectively. The fourth is helping each other, offering and asking for help. They're the fourth and fifth rungs. That's what we do. I just wrote it down. So no rocket science here. And I found over the years that the teams I work with, the customers I work with, they want simplicity. They don't want mathematical Pythagorean theorems on how to build business relationships. So that's what we develop.
Yeah, there's a couple of observations in what you said. One is, why would you think somebody would be offended because you were, what was your concern about offending somebody about knowing what the process steps were to actually form a relationship?
I appreciate that, Chris. Well, we should just naturally build relationships. That's what I had heard. You either can or you can't. Well, what about people who feel they can't? And there's I always say, let's say I'm working with a sales team. 10%, and you can verify this, Chris. 10% are eagles. You don't have to give them anything. In fact, you don't want to give them any process because you're going to mess them up. Right. What about the other 90%? What about the other? I call them the journeymen. Actually, Mike Bosworth, the great author of Solution Selling, called them journeymen. I use that phrase all the time. He goes, let the eagles soar and manage the journeyman. Give the journeyman process. And the journeymen need to understand, hey, I can advance a relationship. And again, so much of this applies to the personal. In fact, my publisher, my better half, Laurie, said you should write spousal relationships that last and sibling relationships that last. Almost make it a chicken soup for the soul kind of series. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not Dr. Phil. Right? Yeah, I can work on business behaviors, Chris, but I can't really work on the interactions of humans outside of business. So I stuck to our knitting. And again, I overcame a lot of folks saying to me, hey, you're talking about manipulating people. And then I really reflected on that. And I really felt like, no, I'm serving people by just documenting what they're doing and giving them some tools and ideas on how to build better relationships.
A couple thoughts on that, though. I would think that it was a departure from manipulation, because one of the things with sales processes, they typically are manipulation. We're trying to get people to buy something they aren't necessarily keen on buying in the first place. The fact that you're trying to make that a deeper level understanding. I would argue that while you may not want to dive into that chicken soup for the soul type model, I think that there is a lot to what you're saying. And when I hear when one of the steps is trust, well, trust and none of this stuff happens without authenticity in the first place. And part of being authentic is understanding who you are and your role in that relationship. So that applies whether I'm a sales leader, a salesperson, a husband, whatever I am, in whatever capacity I'm functioning. If I'm not authentic in the first place, I'm probably going nowhere, because anything that comes out of my mouth to forge anything beyond that is going to be based on a lie, essentially. Either a character I'm playing, which I might lose track of, or And the reason we usually play those characters is because we're not comfortable in our own skin. We're trying to sell somebody on something we're not. Right. I'm a firm believer in being who you are, where you are, and that wherever that is, really. And I think that from a lot of capacities in life, this is Recovery Month, and being a person in recovery, one of the things that to find new opportunities and to advance my quote unquote performance in life is to start by being true to myself and my understanding of who I am. My sales team right now, got some great people on my team, and I'm thankful for them. A lot of really willing participants. But their journey starts by understanding exactly who they are, where they want to head, and what we have to do to close that gap. What do we do to get that problem solved? And I like the terminology you used, Eagle. With the top 10. I've always worked with which I've seen play out an awful lot, is the Jack Welch model that says you got your top 20 performers, you got your middle 60, and then the bottom 20. You got to figure out what to do with the middle 60. You're figuring out where they land. I think it plays out that way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be thought of that way. What are you doing with your total team and helping them become the best version of themselves? How are we working? And so you struck a chord with a lot of ways when you start talking about when I hear somebody's going to be offended by you showing them a better way. I feel like maybe they've got to look at their own situation a little closer, and possibly they're the roadblock in the first place.
Yeah, and you mentioned authenticity, and that is you referred to me as authentic when we started, and I think that's the highest compliment anybody can give anyone. And you said be true to yourself. And my quip is be yourself. Everybody else is taken.
Yeah.
And the sooner that your sales team, I mean, I throw it right back at you. Your authenticity just blows me away. The first time I met you, the
Appreciate
second
that.
time we talked, the third time we talked, I'm like, I got to spend more time with this guy. There's just something there that,
Thank you.
He just, you just find a way to embrace people in your journey. And we talked about the road less traveled. I mentioned it earlier. I'll just pay it off again. We're all on the road less traveled, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Every road is our road. So it is the road less traveled because we're the only ones on it. And there's pivot points, there's inflection points, there's low points like you share with me. I had some low points growing up. How do we overcome those? And I'm going to throw a question back at you.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, we prepped a little bit, and I said, I'm going to ask you some questions. How did you overcome those?
I did not agree to answer your questions, though. That was the one. You didn't have me sign anything. I didn't agree. So, I'm sorry.
Would you mind talking about it?
Yeah. How do I overcome what portion?
The real low period. What got you through that?
Well, for me, it's a number of things, and some of them aren't processed. Some of them was more seeking a power beyond me. I couldn't do it on my own, but I really think it was wanting it more than I didn't. I talk a lot about the I want tos versus I will.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of reasons why I want to do something. I want in business, you want a bigger paycheck. You want to be thought of differently. You want what you think is an easier job sometimes, or you want a bigger title. But are you willing to do what it takes to get there? And the difference for me in my life is when I would say to somebody in my life that wanted me to find better days, I would say, well, I want to do that, or I want to go to this, but I'd always have a reason why. I could find 1,000 excuses why I want to. But as soon as it became I will, every stubborn Scottish Welsh cell in my body determined that there was nothing going to get in my way. And with that requires a lot of stamina that I find as I get further and further away from what I was coming from, it's hard to maintain that stamina because the clear and present danger isn't there. And, from a feeling perspective, but I have to recognize it always is. The same thing when it comes to these goals. In sales, it's tough when you're your specialty area because we're always chasing zero. You can be number one on 1231 of given a year, and 1-1, you're right in the pack again. Welcome back to the grind again in quarterly business reviews. So it's really about having something. For me, it was about being true to myself and what I bring to the table, what I control and what I don't, and making sure that within this 24 hours, I'm setting for myself reasonable expectations. Sometimes these loftier goals we want to go from 0 to 1,000. It never happens. And sometimes when I was trying to go from 0 to 1,000, I would find that when I get to 25, I didn't want 1,000 anymore. I wanted some other path. And you talk about these roads less traveled. So I hope that answers your question, but there's just, there's a lot of nuances to that. And for me, it started with, I just can't take it anymore. So now what? That was the difference.
And you were incredibly successful. And I tend to think we might be on the same philosophy here. I always was a journey guy. I always thought I was an end result guy. Mm-hmm. I'm a journey guy. I don't get jazzed about the end result. I don't get jazzed about when the book is out in the market. I get jazzed on the journey in developing that. And I sense when you say 24 hours, that's the journey. That's not what I'm accomplishing next month. It's the journey of today.
Especially when you talked about turnarounds. So in a turnaround, I can't focus on the whole thing. I mean, honestly, that's a failed proposition right out of the gate because quite honestly, there's just too many rooms that are undiscovered, too many questions unanswered. A lot of times with people that are early on, if they come to me and want what I have and will go to any length to get it, I'll tell them one of the things you have to do is recognize that you have to make these promises to yourself today and keep every one of them. And then tomorrow morning, make new decisions. But don't worry about that till tomorrow because right now you got a lot of work to do in this 24 hours. What promises will you make? That commitment you're going to put your toe in the line for. and what will you keep?
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it beyond 24 hours. And sometimes I couldn't do it on beyond 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It depends on where you're at. The same things professionally. Let's just say that, I've got a number of people on my team right now that have loftier career aspirations based on conversations we've had. And I believe they'll get there, but they're not going to get there today. My obligation as a business leader for people that report to me is not always be there for performance reviews. It's to help them have realistic expectations and help them forge their own journey. How do you get there? I don't know. Let's figure this out. I don't have all the answers yet. And a lot of times they'll see things that they didn't see before that way. We both kind of go on this discovery thing. So there, in some cases, people that are trying to find new career aspirations it's very similar. Let's start small, figure out what we got to work with today, and then build from there.
You asked earlier about how do you know people get your worthy intentions? Mm-hmm. And you just displayed that, sharing with me about how you have these career discussions. Sometimes I've had many people reporting to me over the years, and sometimes these discussions are, they're really needing to get to my job, or they may want to leave my team. When you have a sales professional on your team, an account manager, or a SAM, whatever they are, and they're asking you about their own career path, and they're open about, hey, you know what? This other account team over here is going to have an opening soon, and they're comfortable sharing that with you. That's a great example of what you asked me earlier. Do people get Chris's good intentions? And it sure sounds like they do. Sure sounds like they do. I mean, you met me shortly, not long ago, and here I am doing your podcast.
Yeah.
I hope that's a display of worthy intent that you can put in your column that, hey, Ed Wallace is doing my podcast. We just kind of met.
Yeah, pretty
That's
honored that you came on.
Worthy intent.
Pretty honored that you came on. I think that part of this is that we have to make sure that consistency is there when people are looking towards us for that. I think we lose that worthiness, so to speak, when we vacillate based on any pressure that's put on us. I have 7 leadership tenets that I followed through that I got when I worked back at Johnson & Johnson. They had us kind of look through, who we were as a leader in a program I went through, and I forged 7 of them and I've stuck with them. But one of the ones is I make sure that I shoulder the fire responsibility and share the wealth of victory. What I mean by that is that every single thing that comes rolling downhill, I'm not going to dump on my people. It'll be an appropriate distribution if I feel like there's going to be a reward and our promises as a team. But my job is not to throw fire at them every time it comes at me. Because I could have 7 great days, but the minute I'm reacting to some leadership decision and dumping fire on them because of that, the worthy intent and any of that goes out the window, in my opinion.
We talk about the relational ladder. You start sliding. We use the ladder as our model because you can go up or down a ladder. You can go up or down a relationship. So that's one of the reasons we use that model. And while you're in your executive role, it's to not protect everyone from something that's coming down that way, but how do we facilitate it in a way that could be productive? Right. That's the way a mature leader looks at things. So
we've moved away from they're a sales team, and I know team sports for me mean a lot, but it doesn't always resonate with others. For me, as a sales community, that means that we are together solving the problems we've committed and promised to do. It doesn't exonerate us from our objectives. It certainly doesn't change our promises to each other to hold each other up in the middle of this. But as a community, we're solving problems. And that's something I think is a good attitude for my team, at least. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, you're in one of the, I would think probably, if you're coaching, it's one thing to maintain your own relationships. It's another thing to coach other people to help them maintain their relationships. How do you keep the stamina up as a professional, and how do you help others keep their stamina up? Because I can't imagine every business relationship you have, even as good as you are, is glowing.
Well, from the highest level, I have a commitment to being around as long as I can for Brett. So we have a great family structure. We have an amazing younger son, Grant, as we talked about him earlier, the helicopter kid. And I know that Brett will be in good hands. But I want to be around, and Laurie wants to be as much as we can. So at my age, I have so many friends saying, when are you going to retire? And I say, I'm just getting started. And so I get started with a healthy run every day. bunch of push-ups and sit-ups. I'm finished all that by 5:30. I get a bunch of things done, work related, before anybody gets in here, and I've always had that kind of routine. And I really feel at this stage, I'm as good as I've ever been when it comes to getting on a podcast with someone at your level, Chris, and having this discussion. There's an old saying: once you figure out all the answers, they change the questions. I think I know a lot of the answers now, and I feel that I have great opportunities to share all these different experiences I've had. I've trained 29,000 salespeople. I think I might have picked up a couple of things that can help some other salespeople along the way.
Thank you for watching and listening to part 1 of the Chris in Retro podcast with special guest Ed Wallace. Please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, and of course, review it on your favorite podcast platform.